spent the years showing you how to remove toxins from your home, but can we be sure the air we breathe or the food we eat is safe?
The most popular weed killer in the world may cause cancer. That is the determination by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. Studies of the chemical glyphosate, the active ingredient in the Monsanto product Roundup, have shown that it causes damage to chromosomes and DNA in human cells and also increases the risk of cancerous tumors in mammals. After review of the studies, they officially classified glyphosate as probably carcinogenic to humans.
And so obviously anyone who read this headline, it raises eyebrows. And we did invite Dr. Donna Farmer, a toxicologist with the Product Safety Center at Monsanto Company, to join us and talk about your perspective, because anytime you hear the word cancer associated with food, rightly so, it raises concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. I can understand why there are concerns. And thank you for having me here today. Because like with you guys, I've seen those headlines and I know people have a lot of questions. I can tell by your audience how they felt about it. And I'm here as a scientist, and I'm also a mom. And I'm here to answer some questions as well as address some of the confusion with the IARC report. Because when you look at what they came to in conclusion compared to regulatory agencies, third-party experts and authoritative scientific bodies around the world, for all the 40 years this product has been in use, this is a completely different departure. And so even recently in January, the German regulatory authorities on the behalf of the European Union completed a multi-year, very comprehensive review of glyphosate, and they concluded there was no carcinogenic risk to humans and that it didn't cause damage to DNA.
So you're a scientist, basically. So you're studying this, and you feel 100% comfortable. You even said you have kids, so you're a family person.
Yes.
You would feel very comfortable knowing that pretty much every day of your children's life they're being exposed to this.
Yes, I'm a scientist at Monsanto for 20 years, and this has been the molecule that I've studied all of those years, and I'm absolutely confident of the data behind it. And again, you're probably all saying, yeah, well, she's with Monsanto. But again, don't take my word for it, because the regulatory agencies around the world for the past 40 years, looking at very comprehensive reviews, have come to that conclusion. That's why it was so strikingly different that IARC did.
We do have someone from sort of the alternative perspective. But the one thing I did want to ask is that it's not like IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, is some biased organization. And just to be fair, they're basically saying that glyphosate probably could cause cancer in humans, but not that it probably does. So even acknowledging that, to me, obviously anytime you have an international agency and it's made up of so-called experts and they don't have any quote-unquote skin in the game, that raises alarms to me, as not just as a doctor, but as a consumer, because it's not like they have some agenda.
The Dutch parliament voted to ban it basically throughout the whole country. Well, what I'm wondering is, in our country, what's different about the data in the Dutch parliament than
but it is. But I'm telling you, it's very controversial, because it's country to country. Because there are countries like Germany that said, okay, well, it's safe, and then other countries saying, well, it's not safe. To me, there's so much confusion.
90% of our crops are being sprayed with Roundup. I really want to know. I really want to know.
And so, Donna, really quickly before I bring in our next guest, I guess the question from an objective perspective is why does IARC give this or make this conclusion at all?
Well, IARC
if there's absolutely no risk.
IARC is not the WHO. IARC is a program under the WHO, and there are 3 other programs under the WHO that have concluded glyphosate is not carcinogenic or genotoxic. IARC has a very different process. They've been around 40 years, and I think it'd be interesting to all your consumers to know that IARC does classifications of all other kinds of substances, like pickled vegetables, aloe vera extract, coffee, your cell phone use, and now glyphosate. And they even classify things as professions such as barbers and frying cooks. And so they just have a very different way they look at it. So I'll give you an example of one of the studies. They actually injected the Roundup formulation into the abdomen of the animals, and they did have an effect. But that's not a relevant route of exposure for somebody who's going to be spraying that herbicide. So that's what we look at, and the regulatory agencies look at, and like the other bodies in the World Health Organization. IARC only looks and says, oh, if I inject it, there's a hazard. So there's different ways that we look at the data, and if we had any indication or any concerns about the safety of this product, we wouldn't be putting it out there.
I've spent a lot of time reading about this recently. IARC, again, when they classify something as a probable carcinogen, they're not saying that it does cause cancer necessarily, but it's interesting when I was reading through because there are a lot of things that we do in our lives that increase cancer risk. Our goal right now is to figure out cost, benefit, the truth. We also have joining us the founder of the Institute for Responsible Technology and author of Seeds of Deception, Jeffrey Smith. And he's from Santa Fe, New Mexico right now. And you do believe that this chemical is carcinogenic, and tell us why you have that perspective.
Well, we exposed for many years the company Monsanto that's making these claims. On 2 different continents, they were convicted of lying about the toxicity or the ability to degrade in the soil of glyphosate, convicted by a New York court and a French court. Many scientists who reviewed their research have declared it tobacco science, catching them red-handed, specifically designing their studies to avoid finding problems. They've also been convicted of quietly poisoning the people of Anniston, Alabama with their PCB factory, knowing that the people were getting hurt, and they were fined $700 million. Let me speak also about the nature of glyphosate. Glyphosate was originally created to clean industrial boilers and pipes because it grabbed metals and minerals and pulled them out. When it was spilled on the ground and they showed that it killed plants, Monsanto came along and patented it as an herbicide. It was released this week that the levels of Roundup that's considered safe in drinking water causes endocrine disruption in human cells as well as toxicity. Also this week, another published study showed that it can invoke antibiotic resistance in pathogenic bacteria. It also blocks the ability of the gut bacteria to produce aromatic amino acids, and as you know, that can produce serotonin and melatonin and dopamine, absolutely essential. It can also block the production of what's called CYP enzymes, and they're used in the liver to detox. So if they're not functioning correctly, all of the other toxins in the environment can be more dangerous.
Jeffrey, I mean, that list sounds horrific, and I would opt for exactly none of those things, obviously. But I want to run something by you that I read when I researched this, that it's estimated that it would take almost 10 years and over $250 million to develop as an industry a new active ingredient for a safe or even just a new effective pesticide. So my question to you is, what is the solution? Because we need to eat, and I would rather not spend $100 for a bunch of bananas because there's only going to be 10 bunches of them on the planet if we don't have a way to grow them effectively. So what would be the safer answer?
The biotech industry and the chemical industry want you to compare one chemical to another. But if you look at organic agriculture grown without these agrochemicals, it turns out they have at least the same level of yield as the conventional agriculture. And in developing countries, it can increase yield by 100%. And these are very, very major studies. We don't need these chemicals. Prior to World War II, we didn't use them.
Jeffrey, really quickly, just because I want to give the floor back to Donna, the things that Jeffrey said are scary.
You know, that's his perspective as an author. As a scientist, that is my job, to look at all those allegations that he brings up all the time. And we look at those every single day. And the regulatory agencies look at those as well. And when we look at glyphosate and we look at how it's used, regulatory authorities have all approved that all labeled uses of glyphosate are safe for humans.
And so we've talked often on the show about how in an ideal world, we would all buy organic and eat organic foods, but we have a lot of people who rely on a very, you know, I come from a family of farmers, and they use herbicides, and they have to stay afloat. I mean, there are so many chemicals in the world now that we have to be aware of, and you always have to balance the benefit versus the harm. And, you know, at the end of the day, if everyone had their own garden and could plant things organically, you know, that would be the ideal
world, right?
And you know, my hope, and I'll be quite frank, is my hope is that there are more studies done. There are more studies to figure out, you know, obviously, Donna, you feel very strongly, you know, that glyphosate is not carcinogenic, that you feel very safe, you know, but you have to understand why there are people who are dubious, like Jeffrey, and many people in our audience, because there is, it would make sense to the casual observer that
there is evidence to support that theory.
Definitely.
You know what? I agree. And I understand why everybody is concerned, and there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of misinformation on the internet. But I will tell you, and I mean this very honestly, I am extremely highly confident in this product as a mom, and then I can back it up as a scientist.
I think that what we've all learned today is ask questions, certainly know what you're eating, know the research. My big thing is always, just read. Read the studies. If you're truly interested, read, educate yourself, form your own opinion, figure out for yourself what you think the truth is. I'd like to thank Jeffrey and Donna both for being with us.